There's been some amazing third-person action games released over the last few years. Senua's journey through the Viking Ages and Ninja Theory's Hellblade captivated audiences with its gorgeous visuals, its strange and unsettling puzzle design, and incredible storytelling as she battled not just the bleak world surrounding her, but the demons within her own mind. In a similar fashion, the Plague Tale series, drenched in drama, horror, and the thick, suffocating atmosphere of the 1348 Plague, equally wowed gamers with its mix of intense storytelling and well-balanced gameplay. 1348 Ex Voto, coming to us from Said Leo, a brand new studio based out of Italy, looks to offer some of what those aforementioned games brought audiences, while adding realistic, stance-driven sword combat reminiscent of titles like For Honor and Bushido Blade. But does this indie release bring great honor to the many games before it, or does it die by the sword? Let's find out in our full review. But real quick, you can support real people that make real things over at patreon.com/idreamofindiegames, where your new indie gaming community is waiting for you. Set in 14th century Italy, 1348 Ex Voto is a third-person action game that centers almost entirely on its combat engine. There's some light exploration across a handful of beautiful set pieces, the occasional crate to push, a touch of platforming, and a few narrative cutscenes to keep the story moving. But the vast majority of your time is spent in small, arena-like encounters as you try to master the game's interesting, though ultimately unsuccessful, take on swordplay. Our tale centers around Ita and her closest one, Bianca. Ita dreams of being a great knight, while Bianca grew up under much different circumstances as a servant within the castle where the lead character lived. Despite this, the two characters were able to form a unique bond between one another. There's been much fuss made online about 1348 Ex Voto's main plotline and its historical accuracy, but the reality is storytelling is the least of the game's concerns. In fact, the little bit we do get is somewhat interesting and mostly well written. Unfortunately, Ita, the person we spend the most time with, is a pretty one-dimensional character and maybe the weakest part of the entire narrative. For the vast majority of this 6 to 9 hour campaign, she moans and cries about her dear missing Bianca, but we don't learn much else that's interesting about her. But that said, there are interesting characters inhabiting this world, and you can't say the voice actors don't try their damnedest to breathe life into these dying lands. Regardless of who's speaking, each line is delivered with strength and conviction, making it a bit of a shame that the story wasn't a bigger part of the experience, or that more focus wasn't placed on the political drama rather than its generic go rescue your lover plot. There are some genuinely great deliveries here, backed by a stirring soundtrack filled with beautifully orchestrated pieces fitting the era. Unfortunately, getting to those more interesting narrative moments is difficult, because the act of playing 1348 Ex Voto is the equivalent of being smacked on the head with a wet noodle. Let's start with the combat, which makes up the vast majority of playtime. As you run from point A to point B, you'll encounter small groups of enemies, usually no more than 3 at a time, with a few more sometimes joining in once those initial foes are dispatched. While enemies will occasionally attack you simultaneously, most can be baited out and dealt with one at a time. The few times where this isn't possible, well, your odds of survival are about as good as trying to hold down a glass of spoiled milk you chugged an hour ago. As for why the rest of enemies prefer to patiently stand around and wait their turn while you slice it out, well, you'd have to ask the developers. Maybe they were practicing some old-time chivalry. Ita uses her long sword, which can be upgraded through gameplay, and she can also level up and learn additional attacks by spending scrolls hidden throughout the environments. She also collects food to restore hit points because, for all the realism 1348 Ex Voto tries to project at times, it never lets you forget that it's still very much a video game in the goofiest of ways. Let's have realistic swordplay, but then eat an apple and magically gain back a hit point. I don't know, bandages or something could have been cool, or at the very least it would have been neat if certain limbs became wounded and unusable. Remember when Snake would get all fucked up in Metal Gear Solid 3, for example, and you had to try to fix him? That was kinda awesome. In battle, Ita can switch between 2 different stances, one-handed or two-handed. In the one-handed stance, you're left more wide open than Jerry Rice was on the football field, but you can target an enemy's midsection and try to dodge attacks. The two-handed stance lets you block incoming attacks, though your guard will steadily drop and eventually break if it's pushed all the way down. The goal is to chip away at an enemy's guard until it's fully lowered, and then finish them off. In the meantime, you have to make sure you're not leaving yourself wide open in the process. Attacking is done with the right trigger, eventually causing more cramping than the Taco Bell value menu. The two-handed stance is activated with the left trigger, and it has to be held down to block. The control scheme is extremely uncomfortable, not helped by how unresponsive everything feels. I've gotten more response out of my shitbox car's Bluetooth connection than I did in this game. That's a shame because I like the idea of switching between stances, but here it's been poorly executed. There are a few advanced tactics, such as perfect strikes, that are faster and deal more damage, but for the most part, combat never evolves much past beyond gaining a few additional swings. Making matters worse is the fact that every enemy has seemingly trained at the Royal Academy of Overly Aggressive Sword Enthusiasts, as they can block just about every attack thrown their way with lightning speed. Meanwhile, Ita is left open to cheap hit after cheap hit, sometimes having to rely on a dodge that doesn't like the dodge. These battles are about as much fun as walking in on your lover ass up with the mailman, and a lesser man would have quit at the first boss encounter. Oh yes, there are boss encounters, and they're just as miserable as you'd expect, requiring tremendous luck and a deep understanding of the game's somewhat broken mechanics to hope to survive. And on the topic of brokenness, 1348 Ex Voto has no shortage of bugs and glitches, including one boss who disappeared into a tree and became completely untouchable. That fight was so obnoxious I quite literally had to email the very nice PR people to make sure I wasn't doing anything wrong and that there was in fact a way to win the encounter. I struck this fool over 100 times, but because his guard didn't break twice, he was apparently invincible, like Wolverine's adamantium claws. This was 1 hour of my life I'll never get back. And here's the thing, you might be willing to forgive some jank-ass combat in a standard upgrade system if the rest of the game had variety, but there's almost none to be found. Your only reward for victory is a trek through some admittedly beautiful nature paths, which don't offer any side quests of interest, just the occasional scroll or trinket. For the most part, it's an empty march that gives you plenty of time to think about how much you're dreading the next combat encounter, because you know it's coming. Occasionally, you'll need to climb a nondescript rock or attempt to jump between platforms, which, well, you already know how that's going to feel, but that's about it. At least the game ran well enough on my 4070 outside of the bugs and glitches, without too many glaring frame rate drops that hindered the experience further. You know, the kicker here is that with more time in the oven, you get the sense that 1348 Ex Voto very well could have been a good game. Its environments are absolutely gorgeous for as little as they offer. Trees realistically sway back and forth. Vast open skies stretch across rolling plains. Castle walls are wonderfully detailed. It's a fantastic looking product, only held back by some very creepy character models with stiff, awkward facial animations. It's a world begging for deeper lore, more adventures, and better gameplay. Those things might have come a few years down the road, but here's the reality. I take no joy in calling out the many flaws of an indie game. I want every game I play to be great, and I want to be able to recommend it to you. But 1348 Ex Voto is an unfinished game. There's really no other way to say it, and you only need about an hour with it to reach that conclusion yourself. Your time and money are precious, and sadly, this release respects neither. At I Dream of Indie Games, we do believe games are so much more than a number. That's why we have our Genie Lamp tier system. You want to avoid that dreaded Indie Krampus at all costs, but we go all the way up to the elusive Gold and Genie Lamp of approval for those essential releases. And it's been a long time, but sadly, I have to summon the dreaded Indie Krampus for this release. I just can't find too much redeeming about it, and you should avoid it at all costs.